080, The Origin of Superpowers. You are listening at novelfull.audio. According to Jessica's description, her superpowers originated from a traffic accident, a few years ago. On a trip to the Disney parks, the vehicle driven by Jessica's parents, collision with a large truck carrying radioactive chemicals. His parents and younger brother died on the spot. Jessica was seriously injured and fell into a coma that lasted for several months. When she wakes up, unintentionally discovered that he had gained strength far beyond that of ordinary people. The unknown chemicals at the car accident scene completely changed her cell structure. Perhaps even the genetic organization has changed. Rorschach stood in front of the hospital bed and listened quietly to Jessica's story. When he heard that the source of Jessica's superpowers was due to some unknown chemical agent, Rorschach couldn't help blinking his eyes a few times. He suddenly spoke and asked Jessica, do you remember which company the truck that transported chemicals belongs to? Jessica, who was interrupted by Rorschach, was slightly startled and said subconsciously, of course I remember, it seems to be called Roxxon Industries, right? And because the driver of the other party was mainly responsible for the traffic accident, I, the only survivor, also received a lot of compensation. The words were not spoken yet. Jessica, who had no time to feel sad, stared at Rorschach, who was deep in thought, especially the other person's gradually frowning brow. She asked cautiously, boss, what's the problem? Rorschach took a deep breath. He hesitated for a moment and said slowly, Jessica, what you're going to hear next is a mission I'm currently working on. Rorschach spoke briefly about his run-in with the tracksuit gang, the unexpected discovery of a child's body and some clues from Kingpin. The focus of the speech is the connection between the large number of missing children and Roxxon Industries. And after listening to Rorschach's description, even Jessica, whose injuries had not completely recovered, fell into anger and shock. She clenched the edge of the hospital bed with her palms slightly harder. The loud sound of metal twisting suddenly sounded. Jessica let out a sharp breath. She raised her chin and said to the expressionless Rorschach, sorry, boss, I just lost control of my emotions. This is not your problem. Luoxia shook his head slightly and said nonchalantly, this is the enemy's problem. Based on the information currently available, I believe that Roxxon Industries is creating a compound preparation that can allow people to easily gain superpowers. They buy and sell a large number of healthy children, perhaps for the sole purpose of experimenting with the effects of compounds on the human body. Not to mention adults, a lot of people with nothing to do are willing to join as long as they pay money. Rorschach stood there with his eyes narrowed, two thick arms hugged his shoulders. If the other party really completes the experiment, imagine what it will be like in a society that has been in chaos from time to time due to guns, race and many other issues. As an ordinary person, you can acquire an unknown superpower by spending a lot of money. No money? It doesn't matter, we support loans. Don't have loans? It doesn't matter. We can loan superpowers. You just need to get if you have superpowers, don't you have a way to get money? As Rorschach spoke, he sneered. Haha. Of course this is just my own idea. I'm afraid Roxxon Industries' goal is far beyond that. The atmosphere in the entire medical room gradually became solemn. The expressionless Jessica planned to get up from the hospital bed. Luoxia shook his head slightly and raised his hand to stop the other party's impulse. He said slowly, Jessica, your training has not been completed yet. I don't deny your mentality and will, but this is a war, not a simple street fight. You haven't experienced that kind of horrific scene. Even if you are used as cannon fodder, you can't really join the action. Besides, I expect more from you. Rorschach's unsparing words are very realistic. It also brought Jessica's sanity back to the present moment. She took a deep breath, raised her chin and said to Rorschach, I promise to recover from the injury as soon as possible and participate in training. Then come on, Jessica, there will be more difficult battles waiting for you in the future. Rorschach smiled a little and encouraged the other party for a few words. He turned and left the medical room. For a moment, only Jessica with a serious expression was left in the room. She slowly sat up and raised her palms in front of her face. Then, there was a crunch between a few slender knuckles, clenched tightly into a fist. Rorschach, squinting, was on his way to the equipment room. he also didn't expect Jessica's superpowers. It's actually related to Roxxon Industries. As a result, Roxxon Industries took control of artificial superpowers. I'm afraid it's not much weaker than Hydra, which has infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. and the federal government. However, Rorschach didn't have much fear about this. It's nothing more than a waste of more energy and time, only in order to completely eliminate the opponent. Moreover, he also became very interested in Roxxon Industries' superpower compounds. This is one of the ways to quickly increase combat effectiveness, although he can't use it himself, but give it to loyal subordinates. Combined with rigorous military training, a combat team can be formed quickly. Unfortunately, Rorschach doesn't know how far Roxxon Industries' research has progressed. Can the mysterious compound be used on adults? After all, Jessica and the dead Purple Man. Basically, they acquired superpowers in childhood. I hope the infiltration operation of the Red River Orphanage will go smoothly. Rorschach stood in front of the equipment room with narrowed eyes, muttered to himself. He took a deep breath and walked quickly inside. Then, Rorschach almost emptied the entire equipment room. He embraced a large number of weapons and equipment, walked towards the location of the Valkyrie transport plane. About to face the unknown battlefield environment and enemies, Rorschach decided to be prepared. In order to avoid special circumstances that may cause a shipwreck. David. How is the situation? Rorschach, who walked like the wind, passed by the Iron Man David and asked impatiently. Iron Man David twisted his metal head, the blue light in his eyes stared at Rorschach, who was holding a lot of equipment, and said slowly. My lord, progress is rapid. I have gradually mastered the method of driving this Valkyrie. However, Rorschach just smiled. Iron Man David suddenly changed the subject. However, my lord, there is still a small problem at the moment. Iron Man David said carefully. At this moment, Rorschach walked into the cabin of the transport plane. He put down the equipment, turned his head and asked. What's the problem? Is there not enough fuel? I remember there is a barrel of promethium in the material storage room. Iron Man shook his metal head slightly. Respected Messiah. When you created a miracle, the location you chose was not right. All the underground passages connected to the base hall have not been modified. That is to say, we can't fly out at all at present. 081, the Redeemer, the prototype of Gang Dog. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Gao's Chamber of Commerce. The tall Rorschach sat on a mahogany chair. He held a cup of hot tea in his palm and was sipping it slowly. Due to the construction of the base, the time for him to perform the mission was temporarily postponed for a few days. Iron Man David guaranteed a maximum of 3 days. It can expand an underground passage that can support Valkyrie's entry and exit, so Rorschach can only choose to wait patiently. At the same time, he also came to inspect the situation on Mrs. Gao's side, creaking, accompanied by the sound of a wooden door turning. The closed door slowly opened. Mrs. Gao, with white hair, walked in expressionlessly. She walked quickly to Rorschach, who was sitting in the chair, and knelt down directly. My lord. Rorschach calmly put down the teacup in his hand. He glanced at Mrs. Gao and said helplessly. You don't have to kneel down when you meet in the future. Let me report the current situation first. Yes, my lord. Mrs. Gao slowly stood up. She straightened her back and said to Rorschach respectfully. Now most of the gangs in New York have surrendered. Through the messenger of our Lord, criminals who have stained the lives of innocent people have been secretly executed. Most criminal channels such as human smuggling and even drugs have been abandoned. My lord, your annual income will lose more than 60%, and the rest is from the revenue brought by legitimate industries. Hearing Mrs. Gao's simple description, Rorschach nodded slightly. Iron Man David seemed to know his preferences very well. He actually made an arrangement of strong arm and broken wrist. However, this also fits Rorschach's mind. If the conquered gangs do not make changes as before, then why should he kill Kingpin? I remember that some gangs are responsible for the smuggling of luxury goods. The smuggling routes of luxury goods and firearms should not be stopped. Anyway, there are people consuming them, and these incomes should not be wasted. Moreover, the expansion of legitimate industries also needs people who know the business to preside over it. Forget it, let David go to dig talents. Rorschach lowered his head and pondered for a moment. He said to Madame Gao. In addition, we can use the excuse of annexation to launch a strike against other gangs that smuggle and sell drugs, and train some people by fighting to support the war. The words were not finished. Madame Gao, with an expressionless face, suddenly bowed slightly to Rorschach and said, "My lord, in fact, we are currently fighting with the hand, but because most of the battles take place in hidden places and are participated by the elite of the gang, it has never attracted official attention." The hand? Rorschach raised his chin and frowned slightly. "Those ninjas? I think I killed a ninja leader." Madame Gao, with an expressionless face, stood in place and said in a deep voice, "My lord, that is Murakami, the ninja leader of the hand, one of the 5 fingers of the hand. In addition to me, there are still 3 fingers. Because the war I launched against Kingpin destroyed their plan to dig dragon bones, they launched a revenge action." Dragon bones? Rorschach keenly caught a word he had never heard before. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes. At this moment, Madame Gao raised a slender hand and brushed across her delicate cheek. She showed herself to Rorschach and said, "That is the skeleton left behind by a mysterious ancient creature after its death. With some rituals, taking dragon bones can gain the power of immortality. My lord, I am now over 100 years old and still young forever." Rorschach looked at Madame Gao carefully. In particular, the special contrast between her white hair and her physical condition was impressive. However, Rorschach's face did not show much excitement. He took a deep breath and asked lightly, "What about the side effects?" "It's like a medicine. Every year or less, you must take dragon bones again, otherwise the time you have lost will all come back. According to past experience, people who do not take dragon bones on time will instantly age and decay." Madame Gao told Rorschach the biggest secret in her heart without hesitation. "Heh!" Rorschach, with his eyes narrowed, suddenly sneered. After thinking for a while, he ordered, "Then go and rob the hand. Even if you don't need it in the future, you can't let them get it." "Yes, my lord." "What are your plans next? Do you need to review the subordinates who are fighting against the hand? Or go to the warehouse of the Chamber of Commerce? The guns you requested are already stored inside." Mrs. Gao bowed slightly, and a strand of white hair fell from her head. Rorschach took a deep breath. He slowly got up from the mahogany chair. His huge body, which was more than a head taller than Mrs. Gao, made him look down at her. Rorschach, squinting his eyes, raised his thick arms and moved them. He smiled and said, "Then go and see how good those subordinates are." "Yes, my lord." In the training ground inside the Chamber of Commerce, Rorschach, expressionless, lifted a muscular white man with just one arm. He threw him casually, and the other flew into the air. The whole person fell heavily on the rubber floor of the training ground. There was a loud noise, boom. The white man's face suddenly turned red. He lay on the ground for a long time before slowly exhaling. He tried to support his head. The look in his eyes when he looked at Rorschach, there was already a little more fear and admiration. "I give up." The white man took a deep breath and shouted loudly. Rorschach stopped moving forward with an expressionless face. He stood where he was. His eyes slowly scanned the muscular men around him who were looking at each other in bewilderment. Then, Rorschach asked softly with an expressionless face, "Who else wants to challenge?" Before he finished speaking, the people around him fell into a strange silence. At this moment, a thin man who looked like a Slav hesitated. He mustered up the courage to walk out of the crowd and said to Rorschach, "Boss, you have already dealt with everyone present. I don't think they dare to fight you." Rorschach turned his eyes expressionlessly. He stared at the thin man and asked, "Name?" You can call me Frankie." The thin man named Frankie answered cautiously. Rorschach nodded. He walked up to Frankie, one hand gently placed on Frankie's shoulder. "You have more courage than others. Now, you are the captain of these people, understand?" "Understood." Frankie's eyes flashed with excitement. He straightened his back and shouted loudly, "In addition, from today on, the treatment of all of you will be doubled, provided that you can survive the subsequent battles. So, try to survive." Rorschach smiled slightly. announced a message to everyone present, then, he walked out of the training ground without even looking back. He didn't care about the rising morale of his men, for these gang members with complicated identities and blood on their hands, the stick and carrot approach always works. Let you, the scum of the past, become the cornerstone of the future of mankind. The voice like a mosquito floated out of Rorschach's mouth, it slowly dissipated in the cheers behind him. 083, Sneak into the orphanage. You are listening at MTnovel.audio. The thick clouds were quickly shattered by Valkyrie's huge fuselage. Gradually, a mark in the sky was drawn like a wound. The interior of the cabin was shaking slightly. Rorschach skillfully put on the solar void combat armor. He stared at the many weapons placed in front of him. In the end, he chose the chainsword and bolter and carried them behind his back. Then, after hesitating for a moment, Rorschach picked up the plasma pistol and the refraction field generator and stuffed them into his body. After making preparations, Rorschach, expressionless, raised a finger. The fingertips lightly tapped the helmet of the combat armor. A dull voice slowly sounded from the helmet. Test 1, 2, 3, is the communication channel connected? The signal is clear, my lord, everything is normal. Iron Man David's mechanical voice came from the communication device and echoed in Rorschach's ears. Kaka, satisfied, Rorschach shook the neck of the combat armor. He slowly sat on the seat inside the cabin. The armored palms were placed flat on his knees. With his back straight, he waited for the target location to be reached. Smallville, just a small rural town under the jurisdiction of Kansas. The vast majority of residents living here are farmers and workers, and the remote location of the town and the exodus of large numbers of young people. This also leads to the lack of exciting nightlife here, especially when a storm that has been brewing for many days is approaching. Most residents returned home early from the town's only open bar to go to bed. At this moment, in a woods a few kilometers away from the town, the huge Valkyrie transport aircraft hovered above the ground with the roar of its engines. With the sound of the mechanical valve turning, a tall figure jumped down. From inside the cabin, boom, Rorschach's heavy body fell heavily to the ground. 2 armored feet sank deeply into the mud. He waved his thumb in the direction of the cockpit nonchalantly. Valkyrie, with its agile flying movements, quickly rose up. It began to hover in the night sky outside the town. The action begins. Standing on the spot, Rorschach checked the direction through the helmet with the night vision function activated. Then, he ran towards a lush cornfield. Based on the map provided by Iron Man David, Red River Orphanage is located just on the edge of the small town of Smallville. It was also barely surrounded by a small river that passed through most of the town. Maybe for the kids in it, the entire orphanage is an isolated island. Soon after, Rorschach chose a shallow place to wade through and crouched next to a few thin corn plants. Right in front of him, a 4-story ancient building stood beneath the gloomy night sky. At first glance, the interior of the building, which looks like a sleeping beast, is almost completely dark. Only a few street lights outside were still bright. Rorschach stared at the nearby buildings. He whispered to the communication device and said, "David, block the orphanage's monitoring equipment and network communication signals." "My lord, it was completed 5 minutes ago." Hear Iron Man David's reply. Rorschach took a deep breath. He quickly stood up and stepped forward. In just one leap, he climbed over a low wall. Bang! The heavy body wearing combat armor fell heavily to the ground with a muffled sound. Rorschach cautiously glanced at the surrounding environment. After discovering that no attention was drawn, he was like a wild wolf ambushing its prey, crossing an open space with cautious movements. We arrived under the building of the orphanage. Rumble. Right now, bursts of low thunder suddenly sounded in the gloomy night sky. The rapid rain fell immediately, watered on the land of the small town of Smallville. Rorschach, who was leaning against the wall, seemed not to be disturbed by the sudden rainstorm. He looked through the window, checked the situation inside the building repeatedly. What appeared in front of Rorschach seemed to be a classroom and activity room belonging to children. There are only some tables and chairs inside. There are also boxes of toys piled in the corner. Rorschach tentatively pushed the window that was hit by raindrops. After discovering that the window was not locked, he immediately pushed open the window and climbed into the interior of the room. A pair of muddy soles stepped on the clean floor. There was a slight noise. Streams of rain slowly dripped along the metal surface of the combat armor. Rorschach turned around and closed the window and stepped forward, came directly to the entrance of the room. he listened. After not hearing any noise from outside the door, he slowly opened the door. Squeak, however, the moment Rorschach opened the door. A short figure suddenly appeared outside the dark corridor. He almost collided head-on with Rorschach. In an instant, Luo Xia was shocked. The palm of his hand quickly grasped the plasma pistol, ready to go. However, when he took a closer look at the short figure in front of him, he immediately released his grip on the plasma pistol. It turned out to be a little boy wearing green pajamas. Judging from the other party's bare feet and closed eyes, obviously, the little boy in front of him was sleepwalking. Rorschach carefully stepped past the sleepwalking little boy. The sleepwalking little boy walked into the room quietly. He walked slowly towards the toy box in the corner. At this moment, the expressionless Rorschach stared at the little boy's back. Silence. Then, he gathered his thoughts. Started exploring every room in the orphanage along the corridor. 20 minutes later, Rorschach, who had searched almost the entire orphanage, returned to the first floor. He asked in a low voice into the communication device. David, the rooms in the orphanage have been explored, and nothing was found except sleeping children and teachers. Are you sure you are not looking in the wrong place? Wait a moment. My lord, please go to the bathroom on the first floor and search again. Electromagnetic signals are constantly echoing in that location. Bathroom? Rorschach's eyes hidden behind his helmet narrowed slightly. He quickly rushed to the designated location. At this moment, the heavy rain outside seemed to be pouring more rapidly. The continuous heavy rain also covered up the slight sound of the combat armor. Rorschach arrived at the bathroom again. He once again explored every place inside. Finally, right under a sink, Rorschach bent down to explore and discovered a special device with a keyhole. There seemed to be 2 old light bulbs, one red and one green, still on it. David? Entering. Done. Accompanied by the mechanical sounds of Iron Man. David, right in front of Rorschach, the entire wash basin and the walls suddenly and slowly open to one side. An underground passage that can only accommodate one person is exposed. Ha! Open sesame! That the tall figure in combat armor bowed slightly towards the entrance that had just appeared. 084, compound number 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rorschach carefully entered the underground passage, the secret door that closed again behind him, and the gradually brightening voice-activated lights in the passage constantly reminded him, the underground base is still operating today, and the internal facilities have also been carefully maintained. Rorschach gradually became more vigilant. An armored hand held a plasma pistol. He stepped slowly down the stairs of the passage. After a few minutes, Rorschach made a calculation. He has reached a depth of about 15 meters from the surface. Rorschach continued deeper, until you pass the end of the passage, entering a long and narrow corridor with the words emergency exit printed on the wall. Obviously, the location he entered before was not the formal entrance to this place. Soon after, Rorschach, holding a plasma pistol in his hand, was blocked by a thick metal door. He raised his helmet, stared at the camera above and said, David, report the situation inside. My lord, the base behind the door seems to be a zigzag structure. The outside is divided into separate rooms. A lot of medical equipment is stored in it. The center seems to be a closed laboratory. However, since there is no monitoring equipment, unable to explore at the moment. The only thing that is certain right now is that there are only 31 people inside the base, including 25 guards and 6 medical staff. There are so few people inside. Maybe this is just an abandoned laboratory. Rorschach took a deep breath, said to Iron Man through the communication device. Forget it, just open the door first. You can figure it out after you get in. However, the voice of Iron David rang out again. Its mechanical voice seems to be full of helplessness. My lord, the metal door in front of you can only be opened manually, and the handle switch is located inside the base. Okay, I'll do it myself. Rorschach, who was wearing combat armor, stepped back a few meters. He activated the refraction field generator, then he took the chainsword from behind. Finally, Rorschach was ready for everything. He took out his plasma pistol and pulled the trigger. Bang bang bang, balls of hot plasma the size of basketballs were sprayed out, continuous bombardment on the thick metal door. In the blink of an eye, the dazzling plasma exploded. completely melting everything in front of it. Buzz. In an instant, a piercing alarm stopped as soon as it sounded. However, the sudden signal is enough to trigger a vigilant response from the guards. A burly guard rushed out of the room carrying a firearm. Is there something wrong? Emergency exit. They briefly exchanged information. They all ran towards the emergency exit. Level 2 alert. There is an intruder. The captain of the guard, as the leader, rushed forward. At the same time, he also shouted loudly to the men following him. However, the next second, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps, a terrifying figure wearing strange armor suddenly rushed out from the corner of the corridor. The tall figure makes the opponent look like a rampaging American bull. The guard captain collided head-on. He only noticed the strange pistol in the opponent's hand, and a chainsaw weapon that suddenly sounded a harsh roar. Then, he completely lost consciousness. Boom boom boom. Rorschach launched a charge and swung his chain sword with rapidly rotating saw teeth, cut off the opponent's head in one go. A large amount of blood splattered everywhere from the broken neck. It even splashed onto the ceiling of the corridor. At the same time, without hesitation, Rorschach raised the plasma pistol and pulled the trigger. Accompanied by the roar of the chain sword, the hot blue plasma ball was quickly ejected. After the plasma exploded, several guards who were about to shoot were completely burned to ashes. At this time, Rorschach's battle charge had just begun. He swung his roaring chainsword back and forth. The tall body wearing combat armor rushed into the enemy's team. In an instant, the sound of broken limbs falling and the pitiful wails of humans sounded one after another. It kept echoing throughout the entire corridor. Boom. After dozens of seconds, Rorschach suddenly stopped after killing the entire team. Even the chainsword in his hand stopped roaring. He turned and scanned the guards who were dead and wounded without a shot being fired. A breath slowly came out of the helmet. Call. Looking at the few dying people still struggling on the ground, Rorschach's plasma pistol, which had been hanging down, was raised again. The trigger was pulled. Several hot plasma balls continued to spurt out. It exploded into a sea of plasma. At the same time, it also completely ended the enemy's suffering, and Rorschach walked forward without looking back. When he turned a corner again, at a glance, Rorschach saw 5 men and women in white squeezing in front of another entrance. They struggled to crack the completely sealed metal door, try to escape. Dong dong dong. Accompanied by the collision of combat armor and the sound of footsteps, the tall Rorschach slowly stepped forward holding a bloody chainsword. Such a horrific scene also made the medical staff who had nowhere to escape fall into despair. They all collapsed on the ground with their backs against the wall. They hugged each other tightly and cried bitterly. Help me. I don't want to die yet. The cries that came one after another made Rorschach frown. He swung the chainsaw sword vigorously. After the starter motor made a violent roar of saw teeth turning, the 5 medical staff not far away suddenly became quiet. The first question. Does the underground laboratory belong to Roxxon Industries? Rorschach, who was very satisfied with the other party's attitude, shook his neck. A dull voice slowly floated out from the inside of the helmet. As soon as the voice fell, the people in the medical team of 3 men and 2 women looked at each other. They actually remained silent. However, just when Rorschach was about to use some means to force the question, a brown-haired woman with tears on her face raised her arm tremblingly. She said to Rorschach, "This is indeed the secret laboratory of Roxxon Industries. And it is one of the earliest laboratories to be opened. I can guarantee your safety. Continue talking." Rorschach stared at the other party and said slowly. At the same time, the chainsaw sword in his hand was also raised suddenly, pointed to the others beside the brown-haired woman, and issued a deterrent warning. "I am just a medical staff, so I don't know much inside information. After the end of World War II, Roxxon Industries seemed to want to recreate the super soldier serum, that is, the powerful serum that created Captain America. I don't know whether the scientists they found failed or succeeded. The only thing I know is that Roxxon Industries received guidance and help from the outside world, and completely changed its thinking. In the end, Roxxon Industries created a mysterious compound that is far better than the super soldier serum and has a more powerful effect. Due to decades of continuous research and continuous updates, the internal personnel now call this compound Compound Number 5. 085, Blood Sacrifice Bomb. This is for your own good. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Compound Number 5. Rorschach's deep voice sounded from inside the helmet again. Second question, where can I get this compound? However, Rorschach was heard asking. The brown-haired woman raised her chin slightly, there seemed to be a hint of sarcasm on the tear-stained face. She slowly raised her palm, the middle finger points to the center of the zigzag base. In that closed laboratory, independent samples of compounds number 1 to number 5 are stored. This is one of the backups left by Roxxon Industries for the future of mankind. But the brown-haired woman's words stopped abruptly. Just the wagging middle finger was pointed in front of him unintentionally. Rorschach seemed to turn a blind eye, his helmet was slightly lowered and he asked calmly. What exactly do you want to say? At this moment, a piercing siren sounded all around again. The bright lights inside the base suddenly turned red, symbolizing danger. You don't have a chance to take anything away. A sneer suddenly appeared on the corner of the brown-haired woman's mouth. She raised her neck and raised her middle finger to Rorschach, shouting hysterically. Do you think I spent so much time talking to you just to survive? No. Idiot. I'm just buying time for others. Don't you damn men like fighting? Don't you like killing? Now. Experimental Subject 1101 will come to deal with you. It will help us. The brown-haired woman had just finished speaking. Iron Man David's mechanical voice also came from Rorschach's communication device. My lord, a hidden medical staff manually opened the closed laboratory in the center of the base, and a humanoid object was released by the other party. I'm sorry, my lord, this is my problem. However, Iron Man did not wait to express his apology. Rorschach shook his helmet slightly, he suddenly raised the plasma pistol in his palm. He pulled the trigger without hesitation. Buzz! A burst of hot plasma shot out from the muzzle. The exploding plasma completely burned the 5 frightened medical staff to ashes in the blink of an eye. David, this is not your problem. Rorschach stood there, he stared at a strand of brown hair that was burning into ash and said slowly. It is really a luxury to hope that most human beings can stay sane. Next moment, it was accompanied by a loud sound of metal twisting. Short human screams came from the end of the corridor with flashing red lights. Rorschach turned his gaze and stopped communicating with Iron Man. He put the chain sword covered in flesh and blood with his backhand and put it back behind his back. Then, he held the heavy Seiko bolter in one hand. Soon after, around the corner at the end of the corridor, a short figure wearing a white hospital gown slowly appeared. It was a little boy about 11 or 12 years old. Looking from a distance, the head without any hair slightly reflects the surrounding red light. The expression on the small face with pale skin and delicate appearance was numb. Only a pair of blue eyes kept blinking, as if he was curiously observing everything around him. However, he is just such a bald little boy who looks harmless. One of his hands easily dragged the broken corpse of half a human being. A large scarlet blood stain was left on the ground behind him. Rorschach narrowed his eyes and let out a breath. The tall body wearing combat armor moved slowly forward. At this time, it seemed that Rorschach's movements attracted the bald boy's attention. He opened his mouth slightly. After letting out a shout containing surprise, the broken body dragged in the hand was abandoned casually. The little boy suddenly opened his arms as if he had seen a new toy. The bare soles of his feet stepped hard on the ground. He rushed forward with rapid movements. Kakaka! The vigilant Rorschach stared at the crumbling ground beneath the little boy's feet. Then he looked at the blood on the opponent's hands that had not yet solidified. He stopped immediately. One hand raised a plasma pistol. Stop! Otherwise, there will be consequences at your own risk. Unfortunately, Rorschach's warnings were of no use to the bald boy. The opponent seemed to show no sign of stopping running. On the contrary, the whole person became more and more excited. The little boy who kept shouting waved his slender arms. The terrifying sound of the air exploding suddenly echoed around. Rorschach took a deep breath. He pulled the trigger without hesitation. In an instant, a hot plasma ball spurted out from the muzzle. After flying across the air, he hit the running little boy with great accuracy. Bang! The bursting hot plasma completely covered the opponent's short body. Sorry, you asked for this. However, just as Rorschach lowered his plasma pistol and was about to turn around. Ouch! In an instant, an angry howl burst out from the boiling plasma. Then, the skin all over the body showed a high-temperature red light, but the unharmed little boy actually escaped the terrifying high temperature of the hot plasma. He rushed forward with a ferocious expression. Huh? Rorschach reacted quickly, his tall body in combat armor retreated a few steps backward, the plasma pistol in one hand was inserted back into his waist. Rorschach firmly grasped the precision bolt gun with his two armored palms. At the same time, the muscles of the whole body wrapped in combat armor instantly tightened. Boom! Accompanied by a deafening roar, Rorschach's tall body shook slightly, then, the rushing forward experimental subject 1101 was instantly knocked down by a violent explosion. The terrifying impact even made his short body roll directly a few meters away. Boom! Rorschach stepped forward, the precision bolt gun made a huge roar again, the upper body of experimental subject 1101, which had just been propped up, was knocked down again and slid backward along the ground. Boom! Rorschach's tall body in combat armor slowly took heavy steps. Every few steps he took, the precision bolter held tightly in his arms made a terrifying roar. The little boy who kept screaming in pain was repeatedly pressed to the ground by the explosions, almost unable to move. Until Rorschach walked in front of the other party, even though the surface of the experimental subject 1101 was still intact, but wisps of sticky scarlet blood kept flowing from his mouth and nose. At this moment, the seemingly speechless experimental subject 1101 was half lying on the cracked ground. He raised his head slightly, he waved an arm and threatened Rorschach instinctively. Rorschach, wearing a helmet, lowered his head and stared at the other party's blue eyes. He uttered a low murmur. "Don't blame me, kid. This is for your own good." The precision bolter held tightly in his arms slowly aimed at the head of the experimental subject. The finger pulled the trigger hard. Boom 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 in the corridor of the base flashing red light, the roar from the precision bolt gun never stopped. 086, Injuries and Gains. You are listening at MTnovel.audio. 1 minute later, the deafening roar completely disappeared from the corridor. Rorschach stood there staring at the little boy's exploded head and the surrounding craters. Without saying a word, he put the empty bolter back behind his back. The next moment, his arm hanging by his side began to tremble slightly. That was the aftermath of the bolter's terrifying impact. Hiss! Rorschach twisted his neck and took a deep breath. He struggled to get used to the tearing pain that shot from between his arms and throughout his body. Then, Rorschach staggered over the gradually cold body of experimental subject 1101, walked towards the end of the corridor where the red light is flashing. Soon after, Rorschach passed through a twisted and crooked metal hatch. Entered the laboratory in the center of the base. Inside is a completely transparent observation room. The only internal facilities are a metal bed board and a thin blanket. However, damaged plush toys were scattered everywhere on the smooth floor. Whoosh! Rorschach, whose breathing became heavier, turned his eyes. He kept scanning the unfamiliar environment inside the room. However, when his eyes passed over the corner of the room, I accidentally saw a lot of stuffed animals, after the two ugly humanoids were barely piled up. In an instant, Rorschach, whose breathing was disordered, seemed unable to suppress the tearing pain coming from inside his body. The collision sound accompanying the combat armor, the muscles throughout his body began to twitch and spasm continuously. It also made him slowly kneel to the ground. Then, Rorschach's gnashing of teeth echoed through the helmet. "David, I might need backup. Hold on. My lord, I'll be here soon." Iron Man David's mechanical voice quickly reached Rorschach's ears. It also brought him a lot of comfort, with the roar of the engine. The interior of the cabin trembled slightly. Rorschach, who had been carefully stripped of his combat armor by Iron Man David, lay flat on the cold metal floor. Just on his arms and the large patch of skin between his chest and abdomen, there were horrific radiating purple and blue bruises. Occasionally spasmed muscle tissue left him unable to move a finger. At this moment, sweat was dripping from Rorschach's forehead. Gradually adjust your breathing rhythm. He endured the tearing pain that kept coming from all parts of his body. A few minutes later, the Iron Man, with rainwater flowing from his metal body, carries a pile of data hard drives and chemical compound samples. Back in front of Rorschach, blue light flashed in its eye sockets. He knelt down and said, "My lord, according to your instructions, all the valuable things in the laboratory are here." Rorschach, who had just adapted to the injury, turned his eyes, he stared at the compound sample in Iron Man's metal palm, took a deep breath and said, "These gains are barely worth my injuries." The continuous firing of the fucking bolt gun was much more terrifying than I imagined. The enemy did not cause any damage to me, but let his own weapon be knocked down. This is simply unreasonable. Hear Rorschach complain. Iron Man David shook his metal head, it put down the items in its hands, the mechanical voice seemed to add a bit of helplessness. "My lord, your bolt gun is not meant for mortals. Even the Astartes monks I have seen need power armor to use it freely. You are still alive now because of that person's blessing." Suddenly, Rorschach's sweaty face seemed to show embarrassment, he closed his eyes helplessly and said to Iron Man, "I made a mistake this time, and this won't happen next time. David, I need medical help now. If I can't get it, painkillers will do. My lord, you need to bear with this." Iron Man David stood up slowly. Walking towards the cockpit of Valkyrie, 10 seconds later, the Valkyrie transport plane with its roaring engine slowly took off from a cornfield, the huge fuselage passed through the pouring rain, flying quickly towards the dark and gloomy clouds. A few hours later, Rorschach, who looked tired, lay on the bed in the medical room and fell asleep slowly. Several needles pricked his arm. A drip of glucose solution and a large dose of painkillers were administered. Iron Man David, who temporarily acted as a doctor, sorted out the medical tools. The blue light in its eye sockets flashed. After carefully observing Rorschach's physical condition for a while, Iron Man David left the medical room. Then, it entered the brightly lit hall. At this time, wearing a tight sportswear, Jessica, who had just finished her physical training, stepped forward quickly. She looked at Iron Man with a solemn expression. He asked with a concerned tone, "David, what happened to the boss? Is there something wrong with the action plan?" "Hello, Ms. Jessica." Iron Man David shook his metal arm at Jessica, the mechanical voice said without emotion. "My lord's action went very smoothly, but unfortunately there was a small accident in the process. However, this is also a kind of experience and growth for my lord." "Accident?" Jessica stared at the Iron Man David with a frown and blinked a few times. "Is the boss's injury serious? Do you need real medical personnel? A friend I know can provide medical help." However, Jessica, with a sincere tone, before she finished speaking, she was interrupted by the metal finger raised by the Iron Man David. Its eye sockets flashed with blue light, and it said lightly, "Ms. Jessica, please remember that such important matters require my lord to make decisions personally. However, we do need medical personnel to stay at the base. You can contact the other party and propose conditions, but you cannot reveal any news about my lord, otherwise, my lord may not recognize your kindness. Rorschach is my boss and friend. Of course I know what to do." Jessica, with a frown on her face, hugged her hands. She straightened her back and stared at the Iron Man. Then, Jessica turned around and walked out of the base with an expressionless face. After the other party's back disappeared, Iron Man David shook his metal head left and right. He whispered, "According to Ms. Jessica's heart rate and the secretion of hormones in her body, I seem to have said something wrong. I just reminded her to remain loyal and not to make decisions without authorization. I didn't say much." Iron Man David's mechanical voice seemed to be full of doubts. Then, it turned and walked towards the place where the Valkyrie transport plane was parked. Those equipment used by Rorschach, and the flying vehicles that completed the first mission still needed to sort out and maintain. "I really still like to deal with building materials. At least those things will not produce inexplicable emotions. Respected Messiah is not bad. He has been polite most of the time and even respected me, a timid and humble servant, too much." For a while, the chatter from Iron Man David kept echoing in the hall of the base. Finally, it disappeared without a trace. 087, Space Wolves. There are no wolves on Fenris. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After waking up, Rorschach sniffed the familiar smell of disinfectant. Google search reading that a few fingers groped for the button of the multifunctional bed, accompanied by the subtle sound of mechanical rotation. His upper body was slowly supported by the bed. Rorschach looked down at the purple and blue bruises on his body that were still fading. A helpless sigh came out of his mouth. Then, not wanting to just sit there in a daze, he opened the simulator page. Since the injury needs to be recuperated, he has to find something to do. Rorschach plans to try a new simulation. After he silently prayed to the Emperor in his heart, after setting the time ratio, he started the simulator. Simulation starting. Current identity, mortal. Please choose your identity first. If you refuse, you will be here immediately. Identity selection has been refused. Simulation starting. You have descended into the Warhammer universe. Time unknown. Location, Milky Way, hazy star region, Fenris. You have descended onto the surface of the planet. Thin clothes cannot provide you with any protection. The biting cold wind penetrates every inch of your skin and penetrates deep into every bone of yours. You inhale a large breath of cold air to stay awake. You step on the deep snow and try to find a place to keep warm. However, all you see is a piece of white snow and short, thick bare trees. Your hands and feet gradually feel numb, followed by a tingling pain like a needle. You have to jog to try to increase the speed of blood circulation. You rush into a sparse woodland. You suddenly realize that the crisis you are facing is far more than just the cold weather that is everywhere. Right in front of you, 3 thick-haired Fenris wolf cubs shake the gray mane on their necks and slowly stand up, baring their yellow fangs at you. You take a deep breath of cold air again. You bend down slightly and try to retreat backwards. However, your behavior seems to send a signal to the Fenris wolf cubs to eat. 12 sharp wolf claws crush the snow on the ground and pounce on you. You quickly roll backwards and pull out a dry branch as thick as an arm from the nearby snow. Your retreat is not cowardly, but a search for a weapon. You swing the dry branch vigorously. The slightly bent branch is like a dancing chainsaw sword, hitting the open bloody mouth of a Fenris wolf cub heavily. Accompanied by the crisp sound of broken fangs and the wailing of the Fenris wolf cub. You dodged sideways with all your strength and successfully avoided the attack of another Fenris wolf cub. You waved the dry branch in your hand again. This time, the dry branch fell heavily on the lumbar spine of the third Fenris wolf cub, making a dull thud. A violent recoil force caused the dry branch to break suddenly. You clenched the remaining dry branches in your hand and let out a roar from deep in your throat. You jumped up and rushed forward. A strong arm suddenly grabbed the neck of the Fenris wolf cub, whose lower body was paralyzed, and his whole body pressed on the other side. You raised the half-dry branch in your other hand and stabbed it deep into the eye socket of the Fenris wolf cub. You opened your bloodshot eyes and stared at the other 2 Fenris wolf cubs fiercely. With the dying struggle and tragic wailing of the prey under you, the Fenris wolf cubs with bared teeth seemed to understand your threat. They turned their heads and ran out of the forest. The Fenris wolf cub under you lost its life, and you slowly loosened your palm that was tightly holding the dry branch. You couldn't help but lie on the still warm body of the prey, and gasped violently. You pulled out the dry branch stuck in the eye socket of the Fenris wolf. The streams of hot blood made you swallow a mouthful of saliva subconsciously. You hesitated for a moment, but still chose to lie on the eye socket of the prey and sucked it. A large amount of hot and smelly blood rushed into your stomach, temporarily driving away the coldness surrounding you. You gradually recovered some of your condition. You get up and look for gravel in the forest, trying to split the wolf meat and get the fur. You barely get a torn wolf skin. Wearing the torn wolf skin, you bite the unpalatable wolf meat and try to get fire by drilling wood. Perhaps the operation method is wrong, or the bark of the fire is too wet. Your efforts ultimately fail. The sky gradually darkens, the temperature in the forest drops again, and palm-sized crystal snowflakes continue to fall. Gritting your teeth, you drag the cold and stiff wolf corpse to a sheltered place. You barely dig a half-meter deep snow pit from the snow. You curl up in the snow pit, shivering, and cover the cold wolf corpse with your body. Your body temperature drops rapidly. But you seem to feel an uncontrollable heat filling your body. Your consciousness gradually becomes blurred. You seem to hear a long wolf howl as you approach death. You slowly open your eyes. You did not die quietly in the cold winter night. You find that you are covered with a complete cave bear skin. 2 meters away, a huge fire is burning, melting the surrounding snow and bringing you endless heat. A skinned and gutted Fenris elk is placed above the fire, and the flames keep licking it, making a sound of fat bursting. You swallow subconsciously. You just want to get up and check. You must not be a Fenrisian. Even if the people here die of hunger and cold, they will not eat Fenris wolves. An old and deep voice suddenly came from behind the fire. You narrowed your eyes slightly, and your sight passed the dancing flames. It was a huge figure wearing a wolf skull. The black power armor that constantly reflects the firelight is inlaid with gorgeous dark golden lines. He sat casually on a tree stump, and a power scepter like an eagle's wings was inserted diagonally into the snow in front of him. The Emperor's currency, loyal messenger, foreigner Rorschach. Thank you for saving my life. You slowly stood up and performed the military salute of the Astra Militarum to the strange Astartes. At this moment, the Astartes opposite suddenly let out a low laugh. You gradually felt creepy because of the other party's laughter. Space Wolf, Wolf Priest Ulrich. Welcome to Asaheim, foreigner. The vigorous and powerful voice of the Astartes named Ulrich penetrated the leaping flames and reached your ears. 088, Space Wolves, There Are No Wolves on Fenris, Part 2. You are listening at MTnovel.audio. You devoured a leg of Fenris elk voraciously. Google search reading, The hot fat dripped down your fingers into the snow and gradually solidified into blocks. Until most of the cooked meat on the leg slid into your stomach. You slowed down your eating speed and slowly sucked the delicious juice flowing from the leg. Wolf Priest Ulrich watched your eating method with interest. On the knees wrapped in black power armor, several fingers covered with armor kept making tapping sounds. Mortal boy, are you interested in going with me? Ulrich suddenly said to you who was eating. His vigorous and deep voice was like a vibrating war drum, constantly hitting your eardrums. Where to go? Who to kill? You continued to gnaw on the still warm leg of deer, and asked without raising your head. Your answer seemed to stun Ulrich. Then a hearty laugh came from behind the exquisitely crafted wolf skull, echoing in the open woods and disturbing the drifting snowflakes. Being able to kill a Fenris wolf cub alone is enough to prove your fighting ability. Ulrich slowly stopped laughing, and his low voice became much more serious. But it's not enough. Far from enough. Ulrich's huge armored hand was slightly raised and stretched out his palm to you. Stranger, follow me to participate in a cruel trial. If you can survive, you will become the great son of Rus, fighting for the great wolf lord and the emperor. Ulrich's passionate voice came from behind the wolf skull, constantly hitting the blazing flames in the fire. You stopped eating and put down the remaining deer leg in your hand. You took a deep breath and straightened your back. I have been fighting for the emperor. As for your invitation, I accept it. You stared at the wolf skull of Wolf Priest Ulrich and said calmly. Mortal boy, I am looking forward to your performance. Ulrich laughed again, and the vigorous laughter kept echoing around, as if it produced waves of echoes. You looked at him helplessly. You couldn't help but cover your ears with your greasy palms. In the first week, you received Ulrich's basic training in a simple bearskin suit. Ulrich needs you to forget the past mortal fighting skills and learn again. You continue to absorb many skills such as identifying plants, tracking prey, and setting traps. For the first time, you caught a Fenris elk through hunting skills. Wolf Priest Ulrich praised your outstanding performance generously. You chose to share the prey with Ulrich. You also saw Ulrich hiding behind the wolf skull for the first time. He was a weathered Astartes monk, and an old man not often seen in other legions. Wolf Priest Ulrich had a pair of deep eyes full of wisdom. His beard, which extended deep into the power armor, was as white as the snow on Fenris. You carefully asked about his years of service. Wolf Priest Yurik smiled slightly and remained silent. In the second week, Yurik led you to a white wasteland where the wind was howling. Herds of Fenris mammoths slowly wandered on the wasteland, looking for vegetation covered under the snow. Wolf Priest Yurik asked you to use your increasingly sophisticated hunting skills to find a nimble snow deer in the wasteland and bring it back alive. You obtained a simple dagger made of sea monster teeth from Yurik. This is the only equipment you can have besides the simple bear skin suit on your body. You entered the white wasteland alone. You carefully followed the footprints of a group of Fenris mammoths. According to the knowledge taught by Yurik, the terrifying Fenris wolves generally do not appear in the pastures of Fenris mammoths. You occasionally hide in the snow turned over by the mammoths, looking for some plant roots to satisfy your hunger. You accidentally discovered the traces of a group of snow deer. You left the pastures of the mammoths. You occasionally turned over the snow to look for food. You accidentally encountered a hibernating furious badger. This Fenris beast that seems to be angry all the time is only half the size of an adult. However, the furious badger is far more difficult to deal with than the Fenris wolf in terms of both its desire to attack and its stubborn character. You had to attack the other party first. You killed the furious badger with a sharp-toothed dagger. You only got some flesh and blood. You heard the howling of wolves in the howling cold wind, and had to give up the prey you had caught. In order to avoid the tracking of the wolf pack, you temporarily lost your way. A few days later, you found the traces of snow deer again. You followed it carefully. You found a large group of snow deer in a hilly area. Hungry and thirsty, you chose to use a trap. You successfully captured a snow deer cub. However, the large number of snow deer fleeing in all directions also disturbed a terrifying ice demon. You stared at the 5-meter-tall, terrifying monster that was even bigger than a Lehman Russ tank and couldn't help but gasp. You picked up the snow deer cub from the trap and fled in panic. Soon after, a tall figure wearing black power armor and a wolf skull appeared in front of you. That was the wolf priest Yurik who had been following you. He looked at you who was almost exhausted and laughed again. In the third week, you followed the wolf priest Yurik and continued to move forward in the white wasteland. You are tracking the ice demon that scared you to death just by showing up. You ignored Yurik's teasing and continued to run at his pace. Now your physical fitness and ability to resist the cold are far better than before. Mortal boy, maybe you think that if you are given a bolter, you can deal with that ice demon. Ulrich's powerful and deep voice penetrated the whistling cold wind and penetrated your ears. But I want to tell you that even the Blood Claw recruits who have completed all the training will find it difficult to deal with such a monster. Ulrich, who was walking, suddenly stopped any movement, and his tall body and power armor stood still. He raised the power scepter in his hand suddenly, and a blue energy field was projected out instantly. Now, let me show you how the Space Wolves fight. 089, Space Wolves, There Are No Wolves on Fenris, Part 3. You are listening at MTnovel.audio. The blue energy field penetrated a deep snow, with the deafening roar of the Ice Devil, the 5-meter-high terrifying figure overturned a large area of snow, revealing hidden traces. The black power armor of Wolf Priest Ulrich let out a low roar, and the tall figure had already rushed towards the ice demon. Your eyes can barely catch his movements and steps. In the blink of an eye, the terrifying ice demon was struck hard on its fragile knee by the buzzing power scepter. Accompanied by the ice demon's painful roar once again. The power scepter exuding a blue energy field continues to fall around the weaknesses of the opponent's body. Hunting and fighting are never simple skills. You need to make a complete plan in your mind, be familiar with the characteristics of the prey, and control your impulsive desire to attack. Ulrich's powerful voice spoke through the ice demon. The howl reaches your ears. Every time the power scepter waved in his hand falls, it can restrict the ice demon's next move. Every attack by Yurik is as easy and skillful as a chef unloading an ox. That is the combat experience and precipitation that endless years have brought to him. Until the ice demon's terrifying body fell heavily to the ground, the opponent couldn't even make a powerful counterattack against Yurik. Mortal boy, do you remember? Ulrich, wearing a wolf skull, waved the power staff for the last time and struck the ice demon's huge head. A stream of hot brain matter splashed into the depths of the surrounding snow, making a sizzling corrosive sound. You stared dumbfoundedly at the wolf priest Yurik, who ended the battle easily, spreading his hands helplessly. In the fourth week, you followed Ulrich through the white wasteland and came to the bottom of a cliff. You obtained several wooden knives with tight wood and throwing guns. There is only one target for your attack, and that is wolf priest Yurik. Yurik, who had taken off the wolf skull, set up a huge bonfire and began to bake a Drax beast shaped like a flying dragon with his own hands. You can only gain the right to taste food by touching the opponent's black power armor with wooden swords and throwing spears. You launched the attack non-stop. Yurik, who was concentrating on roasting Draxmen, didn't even look back, and just moved his steps to avoid the flying shot of the spear. You choose to step forward and fight in close combat, waving the wooden sword in your hand. Your attempt never succeeded. Ulrich just raised a wooden stick and easily blocked the wooden knife coming from a tricky direction. You are so hungry that you have to think quickly. You restarted the attack. You dodged the blow of the wooden stick and successfully entered the range in front of Yurik. You broke the tight wooden knife with force, scattered sawdust quickly flew through the air and hit Yurik's black power armor. Cunning mortal boy, your behavior reminds me of a shameful little cub. Wolf priest Ulrich looked down at you, who was sitting on the ground exhausted, and let out a deep laugh. You barely earned the right to enjoy food. After you finish eating ravenously. Yurik suddenly raised his hand and pointed at the nearby cliff. Now, you need to climb that cliff. If you can reach the top alive, I will take you to the next trial. If you die accidentally, I will not bury your body. You will everything I give back to Fenris will be used as nourishment, /. 090, Space Wolves, There Are No Wolves on Fenris, Part 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The Thunderhawk transport plane, with its engine roaring, flew over the snow-covered land and passed through layers of barren valleys. You woke up from your coma and leaned against the porthole, staring at the magnificent scene flashing outside the cabin. In the low-lying part of the valley, Fenris elk fled in panic. The Fenris wolves that were hunting their prey stopped chasing. They raised their black-maned necks and howled at the Thunderhawk transport plane. As the Thunderhawk transport plane flew, the valley landscape was quickly forgotten. You stood up and took a piece of dried meat handed to you by wolf priest Yurik, and after carefully softening it with saliva, you kept chewing it. Yurik closed his eyes and sat in the seat of the transport plane, and his armored fingers kept tapping the ceramic steel on his knees. You seemed to vaguely feel a kind of sincere emotion from the other party's gradually relaxed expression. That is the joy and attachment of the lone wolf returning home. You tear the hard meat jerky with force, and look out of the porthole again. The Thunder Eagle transport plane takes you into an endless stretch of icebergs. You see blurry figures wearing animal skins carrying prey on their backs walking on the ice and snow. Not far away, a team of tall figures wearing power armor noticed the traces and sounds of the Thunder Eagle transport plane, and they seem to be waving to you. Unfortunately, the speed of the Thunder Eagle transport plane is too fast, so you don't have time to observe carefully. When you have eaten half of the meat jerky, the Thunder Eagle transport plane entered a more desolate giant mountain range. Accompanied by the evaporation of snow on black rocks, white steam rises. A stream of hot magma gushed out from the cracks of the mountain. You stared at the terrifying magma that was erupting at a height that almost reached the height of the transport plane, and for a moment you seemed to forget to chew the jerky. Then, an even more shocking scene appeared before your eyes again. It was a magnificent mountain that towered into the clouds. Compared to the surrounding black mountains with strange rocks, the other side was like an adult giant standing among children. As the distance between the giant mountain and the Thunder Eagle transport plane gradually slowed down. For the first time, you also saw the huge caves on the magnificent mountain. Each cave was firmly guarded by a huge metal door, and its specifications were probably enough to accommodate the repeated entry and exit of the Warlord-class Titan. At the same time, the metal buildings reflecting the faint light were connected and wrapped by winding and thick metal pipes, which made the whole mountain look like a terrifying giant snake lying on the ground. "Mortal boy, we are home. Welcome to the Wolf Fong Castle." The vigorous voice of Wolf Priest Yurik penetrated the roar of the Thunderhawk transporter's engine and reached your ears. In the 5th week, you followed Yurik to the Space Wolves Regiment base, the Wolf Fong Castle. It was also the first time that you saw such a large number of Astartes monks. Wearing power armor, they stepped onto the Thunderhawk transporters and drove out of the Gate of Blood, Fire, and Sunrise and entered the sky. The air in the hangar was filled with the mixed smell of grease and chemical agents. One by one, the red-robed mechanical priests repaired and maintained many huge vehicles you had never seen with the help of a large number of mechanical servants. You are wearing a simple bearskin suit with a nervous expression, and you follow Ulrich's steps closely. You are brought to a simple metal cast room by the wolf priest Ulrich. Ulrich takes off the wolf skull and tells you solemnly. Because you are a stranger from outside Fenris. The next trial requires him to inform the Wolf Lord and the elders in the war group and obtain their consent. But Ulrich also told you not to worry. Since he chose to bring you back, he must be sure. Ulrich's tall figure turned and left. You used the running water pool in the room to wash your stinking body. Just as you used the simple dagger made of sea monster teeth to take care of your hair. A tall figure in power armor breaks into the room. It is a red-haired Astartes monk, who blinks his dim yellow eyes like the Fenris wolf and asks you to go with him immediately. You took a deep breath and put away the simple dagger. The strange Astartes monk led you through a long and winding passage, gradually going deeper into the heart of the Wolf Fong Castle. Soon after, you came to a black stone gate engraved with a double-headed eagle and a wolf's head. As the black stone gate opened, the whistling wind swept across your face. At the same time, 2 dark and deep entrances appeared in front of you. "Follow me." The red-haired Astartes monk turned his head and said to you. Then, the other party entered an entrance without hesitation and disappeared in front of you. You couldn't help licking your cracked lips and stepped forward into the entrance. The sudden feeling of weightlessness made you subconsciously lift your heart. But the friction from behind slowly made you feel relieved. You fell into an underground cave filled with the smell of sulfur. The red-haired Astartes brother was standing in front of a huge archway. "This is the Gate of Makai. Only those who are worthy of the space wolves in both body and soul can pass through here. There are only 2 possibilities waiting for you, death and glory." He raised his hand and pointed at the huge archway carved with wolf heads and mysterious runes, and said lazily. "Do you dare to go in and try?" The red-haired Astartes brother blinked his wolf-like dim yellow eyes and stared at you. You vaguely felt the throbbing coming from behind the mysterious archway. It seemed to be a terrifying power that you could not understand at all. You raised your head and took a deep breath, and walked towards the back of the archway without fear. However, just as one of your feet stepped into the interior of the archway. "Russ! Lucas! What the hell did you do?" The roar from Wolf Priest Ulrich suddenly resounded throughout the underground cave. You subconsciously looked at the Astartes monk named Lucas. He blinked his wolf-like dim yellow eyes at you again. You didn't have time to make any sound. You instantly endured the bone-chilling cold and the heat wave that melted your flesh. You seemed to have experienced a drastic change in time and space. In a trance, you seemed to have entered a gorgeous palace where purple and pink were constantly intertwined and blended.